Hello and welcome to the Empower Couples podcast, where here you get modern, non-boring relationship advice for you and your partner to communicate like pros, fight smarter, and stay on the same team no matter the challenge that you face. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman.
And I'm Jocelyn Freeman, but you all just know us as the Freemans.
And this episode is talk about the seeds before they become weeds in your marriage.
And you probably already can guess what we mean by seeds and weeds. We're going to fully explain that. But I want to start with a question and really think about this. How can you two be so intimately connected if you can't talk about anything and everything? And we find so often with couples, for varying reasons, that it feels like they're these topics that are off limits, or they worry if I bring this up, or it's the wrong timing, or I say it the wrong way, it's going to become a thing. They're going to take it personally. It's going to become a conflict. And then I'm told, well, you shouldn't bring it up, or this is the wrong time. The thing is, we have to be able to discuss even difficult things in a relationship. That's a part of intimacy, of being able to build a life together. And you're going to hear us reiterate that. And so, go ahead.
And on the other side of that idea, I know there's a listener out there, this probably would be me, is also thinking, well, what about over communicating? Is this about now I have to talk about everything, right? Because yes, you might say there's a difference between men and women. Mm-hmm. Women like to talk. So what about the male partner, for example, that says, well, I don't talk that much, or I don't need to share everything. Mm-hmm. And we really want to talk about also how to identify what is a seed.
Yeah. What matters?
What matters? Yeah. What could turn into a weed? I think that's just a really good place to come from. So it's not that I'm having to tell Jocelyn every single thing I think about, what I do,
what you're annoyed by.
She tracks my phone.
Well, I don't track your phone.
And like all that, right? This is not about knowing every single thing all the time about your partner. Mm-hmm. It's about being able to say, let me sit with this. Could this potentially be a seed of resentment, disconnection, losing trust, again, just lack of connection? Mm-hmm. What thing, if not expressed or shared or brought up, could turn into something that begins to harm or just slightly decline your level of openness or honesty or trust with each other? So It's not every single thing.
True.
It's how to identify what's a seed, what's important, so that it doesn't turn into a weed.
And we're going to fully define that here below and really give you some ways to think about this in a meaningful way. But I want to describe first. So we were in Ohio. We actually got to be on vacation for the last couple of weeks. We went to Boston. We went to Ohio, saw some of my family, saw Aaron's family. And there were several, I feel, meaningful conversations that happened, even though we were busy, we were with family, we were doing lake life, all the things. And one in particular, I was just really grateful, even though it was a short conversation, we were in the car, just the quality of the conversation felt so connecting. And I started it asking a meaningful question about our intimacy, our physical intimacy, and what would make us feel even more satisfied and excited about our physical intimacy in the next season. And again, it wasn't this long, we didn't have a ton of time. It was a few minutes, but just asking that meaningful question and sharing how we feel and what we desire in our intimacy, to me, was talking about it when it was a seed. Because in any topic, it could be anything in your relationship, it's very easy to just stay busy. This is one of the things we can do, right? We can stay busy. We can just be focused on the things we have to get done, the daily routine, the grind, and not pause and really check in on these different areas of the relationship and make sure you're preventing it from becoming weeds. So let me define the two differences, right? So a seed, it starts as a subtle feeling, right? So you might not be overtly upset about it yet. You might not be overtly hurt yet, but it's a subtle feeling. It could be a small hurt. It could be a little thing that affected you, maybe something they said or they did. It could be an unmet need. Sometimes it's even a misunderstanding or misinterpretation of words or actions. That actually happened with a friend recently. I could share a whole story about actually coming to the table and talking with this friend and actually revealing how I was misinterpreting some actions. And it totally got cleared up, and it created even more connection with this friend.
Where there was an assumption being made that wasn't accurate.
Exactly.
Right? And that can be very innocent, but with your example, if you don't bring that up and address it, that's where a seed
Mhm.
of a wrong assumption can turn into a weed.
Exactly. So the weed now, it becomes the story your mind is creating. And I'll define that more in a moment. A growing resentment, a change in your perception of your partner, of yourself, of your marriage. Now, there's a couple terms that might be a little bit newer to some listeners. So, a story is really just the narrative that your mind starts to form, right? So, your partner says something, right? Or they say little things, and you're starting to collect evidence for this story of they don't accept me for who I am, right? Or they don't want me physically, or I can't open up to them about things, or they have a reaction to everything that I say. Now, there might be some very clear evidence for your story, but the thing is that when those things go unchecked, because it's usually not a positive story the majority of the time, right? Like this, I was even forming a story about this friend, right? Again, it was a misinterpretation. Had I not talked to her about it, had I not gone to her and brought up this seed, the story I was creating was so negative about kind of like our relationship. And I could have distanced myself. I could have then started to act all like hurt and upset and changed the way I was acting towards her. And I'm just giving that friend example because it just was so like glaringly obvious how easily the mind creates these narratives and then affects our behavior. But let's go back to the intimacy conversation I brought up. If I didn't bring that up, because it was an area I was thinking about, right? It was like I was wanting to focus more on our intimacy and in a particular way. And had I not brought it up, the story I could have created could be many things. It could be like, oh, he's just not as attracted to me, for example, right? He doesn't want me as much as he did before. And of course, talking about it, we totally cleared it up and it had nothing to do with that.
I want to add here, because such a good point. It's easy to construe the difference between you being conscious of that thought. Like I'm actually aware that that thought is there in that phrase.
Mm-hmm.
My partner doesn't want or desire or pursue me as much as they used to.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you might realize that, say, if you were in the morning, like meditating and you were thinking about your connection with your partner, and then you realize, like, oh, that's the narrative I have. So that is certainly an area on how this shows up.
Mm-hmm.
But in your day to day, that weed still exists in your feeling, in the emotion that you have. So maybe this for some people is getting too particular, but the way I interact with you, and I'm pointing to Jocelyn across the table, it's not necessarily that I'm thinking, oh, my story is Jocelyn doesn't desire me as much.
Mm-hmm.
It's the feeling. It's the feeling of being distant. It's the feeling of there being an emotional wedge.
Mm-hmm.
It's this kind of questioning, this feeling of being unsure, of being like more standoffish, right? So it doesn't exist like this statement that I'm so clear in. It exists in the emotional feeling that I have in my body.
Yeah.
And again, even before I give it a phrase like she's not attracted to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then my attitude drives my action. And maybe I don't make a love deposit to you. Maybe I don't inquire. Maybe I'm not initiating physical touch with you. All because the feeling I have
Mm-hmm.
that I haven't even given the phrase label to is maybe she's not as attracted to me.
Right.
So I wanted to make that clear. Hopefully that was useful. It's not so clear that this weed shows itself in the image of my mind,
Mm-hmm.
as in the story being that my partner isn't
Yeah.
attracted to me. It can be much more subtle feelings. And I think that's the point of the seed to the weed.
Yeah. Well, and here's the interesting thing too is that seeds can, yes, start off very subtle and then they grow with more evidence, with more time,
Mm-hmm.
and when you don't bring it up. And then here's the thing, when it does become a weed, it doesn't get expressed in usually a productive way, right?
Mm.
The weeds get expressed often through anger. So an argument sparks and now suddenly you're emptying this thing out and you say it. And sometimes you're like, where'd that come from? That's from left field. We weren't even talking about that. It's because it was there in your subconscious waiting to come up. And we may even say it as a criticism. We might make a catastrophizing statement. We can be passive aggressive. We can be mean. So it doesn't get expressed usually in a productive way. However, that's what we want to invite you into
Mm.
is number one, really starting to catch things when they are seeds, which means you're talking more proactively. That's always why we're about our family meetings, right? That's just a really specific way to create the habit of checking in. So for anyone new here, we have this entire guide about family meeting check-ins. We have a weekly template, we have a quarterly, and we have a yearly. There's a couple ways you can get it. We'll link that in the show notes. But that is a way to make sure you're not just letting weeks and months pass by, never checking in on things that are easy. You might not bring them up on an average dinner, right? But it's those little check-in questions. It's making sure that you're not just caught up in the routine and letting these seeds gain momentum. And then again, it gets expressed often with anger rather than productively, rather than with vulnerability.
Or rather than the emotion, I think it also comes out as a declarative statement of fact about
True.
your partner.
Yeah.
So you say it like, you aren't attracted to me anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, and just think about how you started that conversation,
Yeah. You
right?
don't
Well,
even
your
love me
your
anymore. You
partner's
don't.
gonna. What do you
Yeah.
mean? That doesn't make sense. I just did this. I just did this, and
Mm-hmm.
there's no logic. There's no logic there. There's no statement I can make. Now I'm pointing to myself to sort of counteract your statement, and you're just gonna be off in the, sorry to use this term, in the weeds
Yeah.
and in a conflict. So this is just my opinion. How you bring up the seed and how you bring up the weed. If it is a weed, it's going to be stronger emotion, I feel. So you want to do it when the emotion is not as strong.
Mm-hmm.
But either way, if it's a seed or a weed, to make it as a declarative statement of like fact or truth, you don't love me anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what is your partner supposed to do with that? So I know I'm hijacking a little bit, but for me, again, either way, seed or weed, I think the difference is the level of emotion or level of belief you have about it. To then sharing, hey, this is just something that's been showing up for me. This is a
Yeah.
feeling I've had. And it's more like, I want to just check in that this isn't true.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm even presenting it as, I don't know if this is true. This has kind of been in my space. I feel like maybe you're not attracted to me anymore. And however you want to say it, it's like I'm presenting it as, hey, I'm totally open. Like I
Mm-hmm.
want this to be false.
Yeah. If I could, even saying, rather than saying like I'm not sure you're attracted to me anymore, although you could say that, right? That
Mm,
might be the vulnerable feeling. It's even more so, hey, I miss us being intimate, or I'm craving that, and I just wonder if that's a priority to you. How do you feel in that area? And so just because I know it was so clear for me with this friend, it actually was a moment I could have very easily just kept going with the story, distanced myself from her, because that's what we want to do to protect ourselves. So we can actually sometimes, more overtly get angry or start a conflict. Sometimes we actually distance ourselves to protect ourselves. So I felt that temptation, like, you know what, she's just not even wanting to be as close. And I see her hanging out with these other people. And again, like that's coming from an insecurity I have from my past. But instead, I texted her and I was like, hey, can you talk? Ended up having this moment of just revealing to her, "Hey, I miss you." Like, and we used to hang out so much more and I miss you. And there was more I said, but to keep it short, she was like, "Thank you for sharing this with me. Like, I
mm,
had no idea this was in your space, thinking I didn't want to spend as much time with you. I've actually just been, preoccupied with this and this." And we felt closer and we hung
mm,
out, and it was like, this is what true connection is. And she even said that. She's like, you know what kind of relationships I'm interested in right now is where there's just so much truth. There's so much authenticity. There's not these little things in the space that you can't talk about because you don't want to upset the person. It's like being so real. And you
mm,
and I have that. And that's one thing I'm really grateful about with our connection is that we can talk about anything. Not at all times, right? Timing is, of course, a factor. That's
mm,
where discernment, you were talking about that or alluding to that earlier. We have to have the discernment of timing, right?
mm.
Like, okay, what kind of space are they in? Do they have the capacity for this? And you can always ask.
Yeah, and it's not meant to be impulsive. It's not just
Mm-hmm.
because I have a feeling now I have to say it or you have to listen to me. I think the discernment is, hey, I'm realizing this narrative, this story is coming up for me. Maybe I meditate on it the next day. maybe I just kind of let this one go. But if it shows up for me again,
Mm-hmm.
then that's a signal that this is probably a seed that could be a weed.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, discernment. We don't want to go further into that because I did want to mention, of course, there's the listener and there's the speaker.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about that a couple episodes ago. So, this seed to a weed conversation, I would say, is primarily more for the speaker.
Mm-hmm.
And we could probably do 30 more minutes on how the listener should receive this.
Yeah.
But let's switch gears to the other path from the speaker perspective is that you bring this seed up, and it turns out that the narrative you were thinking it actually is sort of true, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we got to be ready for that.
Yeah.
So as a speaker, maybe half the time you bring up what feels like a seed and you get clarification like you did with our friend,
Mm-hmm.
and they're like, wow, look how I avoided this whole path of assuming something that wasn't true.
Right.
And we're more connected.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but you also have to be ready for you bring this forward and your partner says, well, you know what? You were picking up on that correctly. I am starting to feel a little bit like that.
That's true.
Okay, so all right, I don't want this to be confusing. Okay, as the listener here, if your partner brings this up to you, and we're going to start challenging people more, I'm just going to let you guys know that
We're
going
taking
forward.
things to a whole other level.
Look, you better get honest.
Mm.
This is not the time that when your partner brings up something and says, hey, this is a concern I've been having. I'm open to this being wrong. I just want to have this conversation. If that's actually the truth, you better not step over this.
Mm-hmm.
You better not say something like, oh, no, that's not true. I love you. Blah, blah, blah. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it anymore.
Mm.
You better be courageous enough with your partner that if they bring up something and they're doing it in this manner, it's your responsibility as a partner to be truthful.
Mm-hmm.
Stop hiding things.
Yeah.
Just for your fear of whatever,
Mm-hmm.
that, oh, we'll be disconnected. There'll be a conflict. I don't know what the future of our relationship would look like. I don't care, because you're letting this then turn into a weed and you're only slowly deteriorating your relationship rather than risk it. Be honest and deal with it.
Yeah.
That's what being a real partner is about. So if your partner brings something to you like this, and you know what, there's an element of truth there for you, you better freaking be honest.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're not being a good partner whatsoever.
The more that I've been contemplating this topic over the last few days, the more I see intimacy as total truth. Because if you even think about some relationships that you see, like it could be a friend, it could be a family member, and you kind of ask each other, oh, how you been? And then it's like, oh, good, busy, have a lot going on. That's not the truth. Sure, you've been busy, but how are you really? And so I really encourage all of you to see intimacy, connection, passion, fulfillment being correlated with how honest you guys can be with each other, because only with honesty, and not honesty doesn't have to be mean, right? That it's about being intentional with how you say it, and that you're actually just revealing your feeling.
Well, let me just say, we said it a few podcasts ago, right? Remember, effective communication. Speaker, it's about yourself.
Yeah, how you're feeling.
Yeah,
Exactly.
so you don't need to make this about your partner. So speak truly about yourself. Hey, here's how I'm feeling. And so I think I didn't want to cut you off, but that's a big distinction.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to speak truth, it's not effective if your speaking is about them.
Yeah.
The truth is about yourself.
And look, you referred to the listener. When you have these conversations, if you hear something and for some reason it triggers you because you can't understand how they think that or why they do or how could they feel that way, you're listening from the wrong context, and you got to go back and listen to our episode about the speaking and listening, because there's no point in taking it personally. Instead, what if you saw what your partner said as like, wow, they trust me enough. They feel safe enough with me to share that. Wow, let me actually be a safe space for them. Let me actually be receptive, because you know what? This can lead to clarity. This can lead to connection. I can't tell you how many times with us, with friends, when there's been these clarifying conversations of like, hey, here's what I've been, assuming, or this is what affected me. And I didn't bring it up to you before, but it's still been on my mind. Wow, it just completely leads to more of a bond, more of a connection. And so we hope that this is really landing for you.
So
Yeah,
let
go
me
ahead.
help land the plane on this one because I want to make it really clear.
Mhm.
In my mind, I'm illogical. So there was the listener. We were pretty bold about that. So the speaker, let's lay this out. You have been courageous and vulnerable to share something that you feel could be true, maybe not. It's a seed. You want to make sure it doesn't become a weed. It's like, wow. I mean, honestly, it takes a lot. So you bring it up.
Mhm.
Half the time, you find it wasn't what you thought. Perfect. Some of the other time, your partner is going to share, well, part of that is true.
Mhm.
Okay. Are you prepared? You've been courageous. You've been vulnerable. You put it out there. Now, we know this is difficult, but in this second path where your partner says, well, there is an element of truth, it's likely that you get triggered, which you kind of said.
Mhm.
But how are you going to handle that? You have to be willing to see that conversation through. Though, and this is a difficult part, I feel. You started this because this was a concern of yours. And why this is very challenging is because now you're dealing with being confronted with the truth of it. But also, this is now about your partner. Like, you're going to have to maybe hear some things that your actions or behaviors may have led to them being impacted.
Mhm.
And that's the tough thing. And that's where it can feel like the conversation gets hijacked or you're making it about yourself. It's an emotional conversation. It's too easy to get triggered.
Yeah.
So we know it's difficult, but you're going to have to now be willing to shift yourself into the listener role potentially and hear your partner, maybe how some of your actions or patterns have impacted them.
Yeah.
So that's the hard transition, right? I started this conversation because it was something I wanted to clarify, but I'm finding that, oh man, maybe I played a role in this, or there's some hard information I need to hear. And that's the balance. Can I know that I have more to share, but also hold the space for my partner to share what they need? Maybe I need to take some responsibility for some
Mhm.
things. Maybe I was unaware of how my behaviors were impacting my partner, and that's what we were feeling off
Yeah.
with.
Mhm.
So I just want to put that out there. Like, this is not an easy dynamic.
But it also doesn't have to be so hard, right? Like I want to make sure it's not
Yeah,
like
that's true.
this doom and gloom conversation. Oh wow, we're about to have this big talk. Sometimes that is the case. Maybe there is more of a repair conversation, but also this can be as simple as, hey, like I feel like we've been really busy and we've been more distracted on our phones and with, our kids
Mm.
and friends, and I miss you and I'd like to schedule some time together, right? Like it can be
Oh, it's like, oh, great. Thanks for sharing that. You want to spend more time with me? Great. Let's make that happen.
right. It can be as proactive as that. So I don't want it to like come across as like this is all just big,
Mm.
scary things.
Yeah.
That's the point of talking about them as seeds. Talk about them before they grow roots and become weeds and really start to affect the two of you.
Hmm.
So, with that said, we know that there's a lot of new listeners here. In order to put these things into practice, because I know that hearing it, you get motivated and you're like, yeah, I want to get better at this and let's talk. And then you're like, how do we implement this on a daily basis? So, for anyone who's new here, the best first step to take is to do one of our 30-day couples challenges. We have two of them: prioritizing us and then rebuilding us. The prioritizing us challenge is our level 1 challenge. It's a great way to strengthen your communication, focus on your connection, fill your love accounts, and just no matter how busy you are, really prioritize
Hmm.
the two of you. And then our level 2 challenge is rebuilding us. This is giving you the tools, the prompts to do some repairing and rebuilding. And the testimonials, we've been getting an email response like daily from people, and the testimonials just, oh my gosh, they make my jaw drop. They're so inspiring. So go and read both those pages. And if you haven't done one or both of them, you've got to do it because it puts it into practice on a daily basis, no matter how busy you are. So go to the links in the show notes. We've got both of them there, mycoupleschallenge.com and mycoupleschallenge.com/rebuilding, because we don't want you to just hear these things and get inspired for a second. We want you to actually create this change within your relationship. So we've got a lot more coming. You guys, we're coming from this vacation fired up, inspired. Expect to be challenged even more from us, like bold invitations to be the best version of
We want you
yourselves.
to be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not trying to put anyone down here. This is just, we want this to be empowering. And
Yes.
sometimes it takes some hard conversations, some hard awareness,
Some motivation, what are you doing
some
here?
vulnerability, doing things a little bit differently. But yeah, I'm glad you closed us out like this. This is all because we can all be so great as
Exactly.
couples.
Yes, we believe in you. So with that, make sure you hit subscribe so that you can hear past and future episodes. And we will talk to you guys on the next episode.